I knew the mood had soured the moment Daniel Cross, our newly minted regional VP, stopped in the middle of the Denver office floor. That fake little pause, like he was about to share some life-changing insight, when all he really wanted was to feed his ego. "We control your career now," he said, smiling like a man who thought cutting off the head of the snake somehow made him the snake. His voice carried over the open-plan workspace, bouncing off glass meeting rooms so everyone could hear the punchline. "And that's why, as of this moment, your services are no longer required. 18 years of my life at Blackridge Systems. Gone in under a minute. No handshake. No quiet meeting. Just a smug smirk in front of 50 people who suddenly found their keyboards fascinating." My hands went cold, but my face stayed calm. My jaw tightened. My pulse slowed instead of spiking. That's what they never get if I'm quiet. It's not because I've given up. It's because I'm taking notes. He kept tossing out tired phrases. "It's not personal. We're moving in a new direction. This is about the company's future." I let him hear his own voice echo back at him. Maybe he'd mistake the silence for agreement. I nodded once, walked to my desk, and pulled out one of those cardboard boxes they probably keep stacked in storage for moments like this. In the bottom drawer, under sticky notes and a broken stapler, I found my old folder. Nearly 2 decades of contracts, amendments, and memos, some typed, others in the founder's distinctive handwriting. Most of it meant nothing now but one page I could still recite by heart. A page Daniel had never seen. I brushed off the dust, slid it under a pile of files, and kept packing. It's funny, 97% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. I'm not saying you have to hit that button, but if you've ever wanted to see corporate karma land with the precision of a laser-guided missile, this is it. The payoff's worth it. Across the room, a few coworkers glanced my way, eyes darting between me and Daniel like they expected me to explode. I didn't. I set my coffee mug on top of the paperwork and smiled, small, polite, the kind of smile that says, "You'll figure it out later." He thought he'd ended my story. All he'd done was light the fuse. My badge landed on Daniel's desk with a soft clink. He flinched, which almost made me laugh. "You're taking this awfully well," he said, leaning on someone else's desk like he owned the entire Denver floor. "Funny thing about endings," I replied, sealing my box with one strip of tape, "is they usually start something else." He smirked like he thought I was clinging to dignity. But I wasn't trying to save face, I was filing it all away. Every word, every look, every ounce of smugness for the day it would burn him alive. I walked past him without a glance, feeling every pair of eyes on my back. Out in the hall, the elevator opened instantly like it knew I was done here. The ride down was silent except for the hum of the old lift and the faint rustle of paper in my box. I shifted its weight, feeling that one sheet tucked inside like a live wire. 19 years ago, the founder had slipped it into my contract without ceremony. "Just in case they forget why you matter," he'd said. Back then it felt like a kind gesture. Now it felt like an insurance policy ready to cash in. The lobby doors slid open and the crisp Colorado air wrapped around me like armor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what was coming. Daniel thought he'd ended something today. All he'd done was light a fuse. And I had all the time in the world to watch it burn. When I first walked into Blackridge Systems in 2004, the place didn't smell like money or politics yet. It smelled like overbrewed coffee and warm printer toner from the copy machine that doubled as a coat rack. There were maybe 20 of us, and you could shout across the room if you needed something. The founder, Samuel Hart, didn't hide in a corner office. His desk was wedged between the break area and the server closet, and he liked it that way. He knew everyone's name, their spouse's name, their kids' soccer schedules. He even remembered my cat's birthday. On my first day, I showed up in a shirt with fold lines still in it. Samuel laughed, not cruelly but warmly, like we were all just figuring it out together. He handed me my first assignment in one hand and a cup of sludge coffee in the other. "We build this together," he said. But watch your back too. I didn't know then how right he was. Sit, Samuel said, sliding a paper across his desk. Not the standard HR packet I'd signed on day one, but something different. His lawyer, Martin Cross, still used a fountain pen and carried legal pads everywhere. This, Samuel said, tapping the page is your shield. And maybe, one day, your sword. I skimmed it, catching phrases that stood out: contingency provisions, intellectual property rights upon termination binding client continuity clauses. It was written in dense, old-school legalese, the kind no one bothers teaching anymore. Martin explained that in companies like ours, things move fast, faces are forgotten, and loyalty gets replaced. We're not going to let that happen to you, he said. The deal was simple. As long as I stayed, my name was tied to specific client agreements. My oversight was required to renew certain licenses and IP rights. If I was ever let go without cause, ownership of that work and the authority to service those clients shifted directly to me. It's a relic, Martin admitted, but relics are powerful if you remember where you buried them. We shook hands. No HR rep, no slideshow. Just Samuel Martin and me leaning over a desk cluttered with coffee mugs and client folders. Samuel smiled. This company will grow, but don't let them forget you built part of it. And it did grow. Within a few years, we moved into a sleek downtown Denver office with key cards and a receptionist who acted like she was guarding Fort Knox. Departments split into silos, middle managers multiplied, and new hires barely knew Samuel unless they noticed his name on an old plaque in the lobby. I'd see Martin maybe once a year, usually at the Christmas party, still in a three-piece suit, even with tinsel wrapped around his arm by the marketing team. He'd pat my shoulder. Still got the claws. I'd nod. We never talked about it in detail. It was our little ghost in the system. Somewhere along the way, HR stopped keeping the original hard copy. Everything went digital. My scanned file was nothing but generic terms, no contingency clauses in sight. But the real contract stayed in a faded manila folder in my bottom desk drawer. If you're ready to see how this fuse burns all the way to the end, tap that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what happens next. It sat there untouched for over a decade, just part of the furniture in my mind until 2 days ago, when I opened that drawer for the last time. And in that moment, watching Daniel smirk across the floor, I realized just how far we'd fallen from those handshake days. And hollow things. They break easy when you know exactly where to press. Behind me, the muffled hum of the Denver office still carried co-workers leaning into each other's cubicles, whispering in that mix of fake sympathy and hungry gossip. Did you hear? I can't believe he did it like that. Maybe she saw it coming. The elevator doors slid shut, but their voices clung like smoke. I stepped into the lobby, my box tucked under my arm. The weight wasn't just paper and a mug, it was ammunition. Daniel was by the glass security doors, leaning on the metal frame like a gladiator, savoring victory. That smug curve of his mouth hadn't moved since the meeting. In his head, I was walking away beaten, too stunned to fight back. I slowed my pace just enough to make him think I might speak. His eyebrow arched, his posture practically begging me to lash out. Instead, I gave him a polite, neutral smile, the kind you give a stranger holding an elevator. No malice, no bite, just acknowledgement. Then I walked past, catching his reflection in the glass as his smirk faltered for a heartbeat. Outwardly, I was leaving quietly. Inside, the storm was sharpening. Humiliation cooled into something cleaner. Anger is messy. Calculation is surgical. And right now, my mind was already running through timelines, contract language, and the very specific power of that page I'd slipped into my box. He thought this was over, that I'd vanish into some LinkedIn limbo, updating my profile while he rewrote the story upstairs. But my termination had just tripped a wire they didn't remember existed. That clause Samuel Hart and Martin Cross had built for me wasn't ceremonial. It was legal bedrock woven directly into high-value client agreements. My role wasn't optional for those deals. It was written, signed, and binding remove me without cause, and the clients could terminate instantly. And they would. Not because they cared about me personally, though a few did, but because big clients hate surprises and love loopholes when they save millions. I didn't need to sabotage a thing, didn't need to send an email or make a call. All I had to do was let the clause work. It was like the first drop of oil in a hot pan. You know the sizzle's coming, and nothing can stop it once it starts. Outside, the late afternoon sun bounced off the mirrored facade, forcing me to look away. I thought about how many hours I'd given inside those walls, and how, in just days, they'd pay for everyone. I'd spent more nights in that building than I cared to count, working past dark while everyone else went home. And now I was a ghost in daylight, walking away, while the machine inside kept running, unaware a critical gear had just been pulled. I crossed the street without looking back. The light changed and I slipped into the crowd, heading toward the light rail station, just another commuter with a cardboard box. Out here, no one knew a corporate execution had just taken place, or that a fuse had already been lit. Soon the ripples would spread, slow at first, then faster, until the whole thing buckled under its own arrogance. And the best part, they'd never suspect the source. 2 days later, I was at my kitchen table in my Denver condo, coffee steaming in front of me, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. No 6 a.m. emails, no urgent calls, no back-to-back meetings. Just me, the coffee, and the quiet knowledge that somewhere a machine I'd once kept humming was grinding into sparks. At 9:13 a.m. my phone buzzed. Melissa from accounting. "Hey, is it true?" Before I could answer, another came in. "Dave from IT, contract with Oryx suspended. Whole floors losing it." Oryx, the crown jewel of our portfolio, the one with a personnel continuity clause so precise it might as well have had Rebecca Hale carved into it. The messages piled up, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Board in emergency session. Legal scrambling. "You okay?" "It's chaos here." I didn't reply. I let the phone buzz against the table, each vibration a drumbeat marking the spread of the fallout. I took another sip of coffee, slow, savoring the bitterness. There's a rare kind of satisfaction in watching a storm. You didn't have to create one, you knew was inevitable. By 9:45, the tone shifted. First, an unknown number. Decline. Then the company's main line. Decline. Then his name, Daniel Cross, flashing in all caps, like he thought yelling through caller ID would make me pick up. I let it ring out. 5 minutes later, a text: "Daniel, we need to talk. Call me back." I didn't. I didn't call him back. Instead, I set the phone face down and refilled my coffee. The late September air had that crisp edge that hinted at winter on its way. I stepped onto my Denver balcony, cup in hand, and leaned against the railing. Below, the city moved at its usual indifferent pace. Delivery trucks, double-parked commuters hustled by with earbuds in, and a dog barked at something only it could see. It felt good to be out here, detached from their panic. I could picture it clearly. Daniel pacing in his glass corner office, the board trading clipped whispers, legal digging through servers and finding nothing. Because the real contract wasn't in their systems. It sat 3 feet away from me in a faded manila folder on my table. By noon, the texts had slowed, replaced by one voicemail from Daniel. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. I already knew it would be a slurry of forced calm and corporate jargon, maybe the early stages of an apology. Patience wins games like this. You don't rush to finish when your opponent's still dizzy. You let them spin, let them burn energy, and then you drop the truth like a stone into still water. Back inside, I opened my laptop, not for job hunting, not to network, but to check the news. There, it was a small blip on a trade site: Oryx Holdings suspends partnership pending contract review. Just a paragraph long, but I knew it was the first ripple. Bigger waves were coming. Somewhere on the 32nd floor of that high-rise, the boardroom turned war room was starting to crack. Oryx wasn't just a marquee client. It was a pillar, the kind that held up fiscal projections, calmed investors, and let certain executives preen. Now, it was suspended. Not for performance issues, not for missed deadlines, but because of a clause buried deep in the master service agreement, one that named me Rebecca Hale as a non-negotiable condition of the contract's continuation. Not my title, not my department, my name. The new company lawyer, not Martin, of course, was sweating through his shirt as he read it aloud. In the event of the removal without cause of the individual identified as project lead, herein referred to as Rebecca Hale, the client reserves the right to terminate all services effective immediately without penalty or further obligation. Silence followed. Then the CFO exhaled bitter and low. That's millions. If they pull completely, it's 8 figures minimum. Daniel tried to talk over the CFO, pitching some nonsense about renegotiating terms and offering a continuity plan. But legal already knew Oryx didn't want a plan. They wanted the clause honored, and honoring, it meant undoing what Daniel had done to me in front of 50 witnesses 2 days ago. I wasn't there to see it. I was 3 miles away walking through City Park like I had all the time in the world. The air had that perfect fall crispness that makes every leaf sharper, every shadow longer. A family posed under a maple tree turned overnight to bright orange. Somewhere behind me, a jogger's earbuds leaked tinny pop music into the morning air. I kicked through a drift of leaves, listening to their dry crackle. My phone sat silent in my pocket. I'd shut off notifications an hour earlier. The chaos was still unfolding, but I didn't need to watch each wave. The tide was already coming in, and nothing they built now could hold it back. A squirrel darted across the path, stopping to sit up with a half-rotten acorn. It looked smug. I grinned, nature's reminder that sometimes you just hold on to what you've buried until the exact right moment. Somewhere downtown, suits were flipping through contracts they'd never read before today, realizing they were standing on a trapdoor they'd opened themselves. Somewhere, a director was learning what it feels like to be on the wrong side of the smirk. And on my kitchen table, a manila folder still held the rest of the story, waiting for its turn. I slowed my pace, breathing in cold air laced with damp earth and faint wood smoke. Let them panic. Let them scramble. This wasn't a game you won by rushing. It was the kind you won by making your move years in advance and then watching the other player finally notice. By mid-morning, the tension inside that building had solidified into something sharp enough to cut. The board had moved past panic into triage mode, and when triage fails, they bring in outside counsel. That's when you know it's serious, when they're paying $900 an hour just to hear someone tell them they've screwed up. The legal review began like every corporate emergency, a conference room packed with too many people and not enough chairs, every laptop open to the same shared folder, every finger poised to Control F through PDFs. They started with my digital personnel file. Of course, my digital personnel file was spotless, like I'd been hired last year, not 19 years ago. It was a junior HR analyst, barely old enough to rent a car, who finally said, if the digital copy's incomplete, maybe the original's still in storage. Minutes later, 2 interns were sent to the basement archives, a climate-controlled graveyard for bankers' boxes. Down there, everything smelled faintly of dust and industrial cleaner, and the labels had faded under years of fluorescent light. I can picture it perfectly. 2 interns crouched on the floor, slicing open boxes, flipping through contracts printed on paper so thick it could double as insulation. And then, in the bottom of one box under old W-4s and training manuals, they found a manila folder with my name written in black fountain pen, the handwriting shaky but unmistakable Martin Cross. They carried it upstairs like a live explosive and handed it to outside counsel. The room went silent. The lawyer flipped it open, pages slightly, yellowed staples rusted at the edges. He skimmed fast at first, then slowed, brow furrowing as the language sharpened into something he hadn't seen in years. This is unusual, he said, his voice lower now. While all this unfolded, I was at my kitchen table tea instead of coffee this time. Early afternoon sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting the room into stripes of gold and shadow. My phone sat face down silent, but I could feel the moment they found the line like an electric current traveling straight from that boardroom to me. I'd been waiting for this not out of petty revenge, but with the calm certainty of someone who knows the shape of the endgame. I remembered Martin explaining it all those years ago. The clause was an anchor legally binding, heavy enough to sink any ship that tried to cut me loose. In that boardroom, they weren't thinking about metaphors. They were reading it again and again, the weight pressing harder each time. And Daniel, the man who'd smiled at me like he was tossing scraps to a stray dog, was probably leaning forward, pretending to follow the legalese, waiting for it to be translated into plain English. They would explain it soon. When they did, his face would change. The room would change. I just sipped my tea, letting the anticipation stretch. The outside counsel cleared his throat. Every eye turned to him. He read the paragraph aloud slowly, each word tightening the air. The employee Rebecca Hale shall be deemed the sole and perpetual license holder of the intellectual property proprietary tools and client-specific service authorizations developed under her direct oversight in the course of employment. In the event of termination without cause, such ownership shall immediately and irrevocably transfer to the employee effective on the date of termination. The words hung in the air like smoke. A few board members blinked, processing. The CFO's pen froze mid-tap. Daniel leaned forward, his face suddenly pale. Wait. So she owns it now. The lawyer didn't look up. She owns all of it. The realization spread across the table like a slow wave. These weren't just internal tools, they held custom integrations for major clients' proprietary frameworks I'd built, and licensing agreements that allowed the company to operate entire product lines. This wasn't a vanity clause. It was leverage in black and white, signed, witnessed, and still legally binding. A senior VP tried to rally. Can't we challenge this claim? It's outdated. The lawyer finally looked up, his tone sharp. You can challenge it, but you'll lose. The language is airtight. Whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were doing. Martin Cross would have smiled at that. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, scanning faces like someone might tell him this wasn't real. What does this mean for our current client agreements? It means, the lawyer said, you no longer have the legal right to fulfill several of them. Without her consent, you can't use the tools. Without the tools, you can't deliver the contracted services. Without delivery, your clients can and will terminate. The CFO swore under his breath. Someone muttered about breach penalties. The board chair leaned back, exhaling through her nose. The smell of panic was starting to creep into the room, though no one would name it. While they sat there tallying losses and bargaining with reality, I was nowhere in sight. No dramatic entrance, no gloating phone call. Just absence, the kind that feels like a missing piece you didn't realize mattered until it's gone. They'd picture me somewhere calm, maybe reading, maybe watching the rain. And they'd wonder if I knew. I did. I'd known since the moment I slid that folder into my box and walked out from under their glass and steel ceiling. I wasn't pulling strings now. I'd tied them years ago. All I had to do was leave, and gravity would handle the rest. By 7 p.m., an emergency meeting was on the books. This wasn't just damage control, this was survival mode. The CEO was already seated at the head of the long mahogany table when the rest of the board filed in, his expression caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. Daniel slipped in last, shuffling papers like the noise might mask the fact he'd gone 3 shades paler since morning. Outside counsel stood near the far end, not sitting, the original contract folder in his hand, like evidence at trial. His tie was loose, his hair slightly mussed, the look of someone ground down by a day of expensive high-stakes damage control. We've confirmed the scope. He began, voice low, but cutting through the murmurs. By terminating Rebecca Hale without cause, you've triggered clauses transferring ownership of proprietary tools, frameworks, and certain client-specific service authorizations to her personally. The transfer is immediate, binding, and irreversible without her consent. The CEO's grip on the armrests tightened. Which clients? The lawyer didn't hesitate. Oryx Holdings, ClearPath Logistics, Deltara Systems, plus all subsidiary contracts tied to those accounts. Together, that's approximately, he checked his notes, 36% of your active revenue streams. A sharp intake of breath moved around the table. And lawsuits? The CEO asked. They'll come, the lawyer replied flatly. Any client who suffers operational or financial loss from service disruption will seek damages. Some will settle. Some will drag this through court for years. All of them will cost you. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Look, I couldn't have known. The CEO's head snapped toward him. Couldn't have known. That's your defense. I mean, HR didn't flag it. Legal didn't. Document was in her original file, the lawyer cut in, his tone sharp. You didn't look for it. You didn't ask. You acted without reviewing her terms, and you did it publicly in front of witnesses. The word witnesses hit like a shot. The board chair's gaze slid toward Daniel as if calculating just how deep the hole was. I was trying to assert control, he muttered. Set a precedent for the new structure. You set a precedent? The CFO snapped that leadership here fires people without reading their contracts. Good luck getting loyalty after this. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. The lawyer continued laying out the clause's mechanics, the timelines for the first client terminations, and the breach penalties already accruing. Each fact landed like a hammer blow, underscoring how fast the floor beneath them was giving way. The CEO didn't speak until the lawyer finished. When he did, his voice was ice. We're not done discussing accountability, but right now the priority is figuring out if there's anything we can offer her to undo this. From my Denver apartment, wine glass in hand, I could almost picture Daniel's face as the truth landed. Fixing this meant coming back to me hat in hand. And when they did, I'd be ready. Not out of mercy, but to make sure they never forgot the cost of their arrogance. The boardroom air had gone heavy, the kind of silence that comes when you realize you've stepped off a cliff and there's nothing to grab on the way down. The lawyer stood at the head of the table, the manila folder open, fingers resting on the line he'd been circling all evening. He looked at the CEO, then the board, then back to the page, as if reading it again might change the words. It didn't. His voice was steady but heavier with each word. In the event of termination without cause, all proprietary tools, intellectual property, and client-specific service authorizations developed under the oversight of Rebecca Hale shall immediately and irrevocably transfer to her effective the date of termination. He let the paper drop. For a beat, there was only the hum of the HVAC. Then, almost under his breath, "Oh my God, what have you done?" The CEO's gaze dropped briefly, then lifted, his face cold and unreadable. Across the table, Daniel sat frozen, the smirk from 2 days ago, long gone, his skin pale. This isn't final, right? We can work around this. His voice cracked. The lawyer closed the folder with a snap. You can try, but every hour that passes, more damage locks in. And he tapped the folder, has zero obligation to help you. The CEO leaned back, jaw-tight, hands clasped in front of his mouth. He didn't look at Daniel immediately, but when he did, it was the kind of look that ends careers in a single, unbroken stare. I wasn't there to see it. I was on my balcony, legs stretched out, a breeze carrying the faint scent of rain. My phone sat face down, silent. I didn't need updates, I could feel the collapse from here. 19 years in that place, and I'd never needed to shout to be heard. Not then, and certainly not now. All I had to do was walk away and let their arrogance burn them alive. Calm, clean, final. You've heard my story, and now I want to hear yours. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you'd say to someone like me, who walked out with her head high while the company burned behind her. Would you have done the same? Your words keep this community alive, and your support tells me these battles matter. If you've ever been underestimated, remember this. You don't always have to fight loud to win big. Sometimes the smartest move is to prepare, quietly, act decisively, and let the other side collapse under the weight of their own arrogance.